And of course, then the prices rise, the industry gets mature, and that opportunity passes. But for about 10 years, people across the United States were buying these big buildings, turning them into self-storage facilities. This paradigm shift from an industrial building to a self-storage facility and selling them for 5 and 10 times what they bought them for. Another example, simplistic, you all know it, but maybe you don't think of it this way. Now let's go back 60 years. 60 years ago, I'm looking at buying an apartment building. I look at the rent roll, I look at the expenses, I come up with the NOI, and I read somewhere there's such a thing as a condominium. And I think, you mean I could sell off each of these individual apartments as a separate unit to be owned by somebody, a condominium? And all I have to do is file some paperwork in the Secretary of State's office, maybe something in the city clerk's office, and I, without even touching the building, without even maybe going into the building, have turned it into a condominium. I've changed the paradigm of how this building will be valued and perceived because I've come up with a new strategy, a new approach to this property. And that's just what happened. And people across the United States made fortunes buying apartment buildings which were valued as apartment buildings and then turning them into condominiums and selling off the individual units at a multiple, a great multiple, of the square foot on which they bought the building. Now again, this doesn't last forever. Why? Because anybody who owns an apartment building wises up after a while, and you cannot try to buy an apartment building in the United States today without the seller telling you, this is a great condo conversion deal. Oh, am I sick of hearing that? And the building is priced as a condo conversion. No longer do they even look at the rent roll. No longer does NOI mean anything. When I've been trying to buy some apartment buildings in Miami, every single seller says, you know, you can get for these units, these 1 bedrooms, these 2 bedrooms. I say, yeah, but the NOI doesn't justify your asking price. Too bad. And again, the same thing that happened with self-storage facilities. A business matures, prices change, sellers wise up. But what's next? How can we learn from these people who made a fortune in the self-storage business or a fortune in the condo conversion business? How can we learn? What can we do? Well, I don't really know what's next. Some people think that office buildings are going to someday be, they are doing across certain areas of the United States, condo converting office buildings or industrial or flex buildings or retail. Maybe. One of the things I'm investigating in an area that I invest in Miami, can I buy parking lots in an urban area and sell off the spaces? In other words, create a parkominium, if you will. I just made that up. A guy I know in Florida has a pretty good idea, and it's working. He's been buying mobile home parks. And I don't know if you know this, but most of the time the people who own the mobile home rent the pad underneath it. And he's been buying those, and he's been selling the pad, what's called the fee interest, the ownership interest, to the owner of the mobile home, and he's been doing quite well. I don't really know for sure what's next, but boy, am I going to try to find it, and if I do, I'm going to move as quickly and as aggressively as I can to tie up as many of those type of buildings as I can before the sellers of the world figure out what I'm doing. Let's look at the last leg of my how do we emulate what successful entrepreneurs ahead of us have done. What I really am hoping comes out of this tonight is that you all look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm right, or maybe I'm not right, to be a real estate entrepreneur. Maybe I just don't like that life. And by the way, I am not judging anybody. There is no right and wrong. For me, it's right. I can live with the risk. I've lived with it for 25 years. I don't put everything on the line anymore like I used to. But some people live with risk better than others. So one of the things you have to ask yourself, how do I like this? Do I like the idea of risk? Do I like the idea of what he's telling me I need to do to be successful at that? And let's talk about 3 disciplines that I think are critical if you want to be a successful real estate entrepreneur. 3 sort of personality characteristics. First thing is passion. You got to love it. You got to get out of bed every day and get ready for the fight and enjoy it. And I want to tell you how I learned about passion, because it had an amazing influence on my life. I was 16 years old. I grew up in Perkins Township, Ohio, the middle of nowhere. And there was really nothing in this little township except a gigantic, big armory. Huge. And the only thing that ever happened in this armory is that every 3 or 4 months, the Ohio National Guard would show up. You know, they'd do some calisthenics, march around, leave, and that'd be it. And the rest of the time, the armory sat vacant. Well, occasionally, there would be groups of touring entertainers that would call the State National Guard and say, hey, can we use your armory for a day to put on a concert or whatever they were, whatever the entertainers were doing. And it was February 1966, now that I think about it, 41 years ago, tell you what an effect this had on me, that a group of touring musicians were going across the United States in a bus, and these were sort of up-and-comers. They weren't really famous, but they were starting to get some traction. And so they're going across the United States in a bus, and they're stopping at this Perkins Township Armory to put on a concert. And they get there about 6 o'clock. The concert's to begin about 8 o'clock. And the promoters have set up about 1,000 bridge chairs and these gigantic amplifiers in this armory and a little makeshift stage. And the musicians all get there, as I say, about 6. About 6:30, huge blizzard, huge snowstorm. And the whole town is gridlocked. Nobody can get anywhere except 6 or 7 farm boys, me and my pals. We can walk there because we live near the armory. So we walk to the armory, and here's 1,000 bridge chairs set up, and 8 of us. Of course, we can sit wherever we want, so we sit in the front row. We're moving around trying different seats. And out come the musicians. One by one, they can't get off the stage fast enough because it's so incredibly awkward. They're thinking there's going to be 1,000 people, and there's 8 farm boys sitting in the front row. So these musicians, they take the stage, they sort of mouth the words real quick, and then they fly off the stage as fast as they can. Except the last performer. Now, I'm going to show you how old I am. So, help me out here, show of hands. Who remembers Tom Jones? Thank goodness. He had this new song called What's New Pussycat. Does anybody remember that? And he takes the stage, and he says in his Welsh accent that I cannot imitate, so I won't try, I'm so sorry for what happened tonight, but I'm appreciative that the 8 of you got here, and I hope you'll remember me. And he belts out What's New Pussycat like he's at Caesar's Palace with 10,000 people in the audience. And there's nothing to deaden the sound. The room is shaking. He finishes. He takes a bow. The 8 of us, of course, give him a standing ovation. And he leaves the stage. And it took my breath away. And it had an amazing impact on me. And I was sort of trudging home through the snow that night. It sort of clicked with me. Man, if you're going to do something, do it right. If you don't have a passion and an energy for something, whether it's 10,000 people at Caesar's Palace or 7 or 8 farm boys in the middle of nowhere, give it your best. And of course, he went on to have a great career. And the message to you is, I think a great career. I had a very good career. I don't know, great. The message to you is, if you don't have the passion and the energy for this, maybe it's not the right thing. This business will test you. This business will force you to fight through problems, to live with risk, to deal with situations that you didn't anticipate. You need that passion.